The Caribbean, a paradise of golden sands, turquoise waters, and endless sunshine. But beneath this beauty lies a story long forgotten. A tale buried under centuries of silence and sea salt. Before the tall ships of Europe ever cast their shadows across these islands, before the names Columbus or Conquest echoed through the waves, this ocean was home to kingdoms, powerful, proud, and ancient. Here on these scattered emerald isles, entire civilizations once thrived. They built villages of palm and wood-carved idols to their gods and sailed across the sea in great canoes that glided like birds upon the water. They were the Taino, the Kalinago, the Lucayans, the true kings and queens of the Caribbean, whose empires stretched across the ocean's heart. But time and tragedy have nearly erased their names. The songs of their ancestors have been silenced by history's storm. Yet if you listen closely to the whisper of the waves, to the rhythm of the drums carried by the wind, their voices still speak. This is their story. The story of the forgotten kingdoms of the Caribbean, the empires, of the sun and sea that time refused to remember. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Welcome to the Old World Files, all-specific history where we uncover hidden stories and explore the mysteries of history like never before. Don't miss out, subscribe now and join our journey through the past. Let's start the story. Long before the sails of European ships cut across the Atlantic, the Caribbean was already alive, a world of rhythm, ritual, and radiance. The islands, scattered like jewels upon the sea, were not empty. They were thriving worlds of their own, green mountains wrapped in mist forests, alive with parrots and frogs, rivers whispering through the heart of the land. It was here that the first great peoples of the Caribbean carved out their kingdoms. Centuries before history began to write their names. They were the people of the islands, seafarers, builders, and dreamers. From the shores of South America, waves of migration swept northward, bringing with them new life and new civilizations. They traveled in great canoes, carved from massive trees, guided by the stars. Their sails made from woven palm. These early navigators, the ancestors of the Taino, the Kalinago, and the Lucayans, carried not only tools and food, but something far greater: their stories, their gods, their hopes for new worlds. As they settled across the islands, they shaped the Caribbean into a mosaic of cultures. On Cuba and Hispaniola, villages grew beside rivers and fertile plains. In Puerto Rico and Jamaica, farmers tended cassava fields and crafted intricate pottery adorned with swirling designs. Each island developed its own character, its own voice. Yet across the vast stretch of the Caribbean, the people were connected by water, by trade, by shared traditions and kinship. They built villages of thatched huts around great central plazas, places where leaders, the caciques, held council, where stories were told under moonlight, and where sacred rituals connected the people to the spirits of earth and sky. The air was alive with the scent of cooking cassava, bread, the hum of songs, the laughter of children playing near the shore. And above all, they worshipped the Zemis, sacred spirits believed to dwell in stones, trees, and carved idols. The Zemis were more than gods. They were protectors, ancestors, the keepers of fate. Each village had its own Zemi, its own connection to the divine. These spirits guided their harvests, their wars, their births and deaths. In every home, small idols rested in shrines, reminders that life flowed in harmony between the human and the unseen. This was not a primitive world, but a sophisticated one, a world of politics, trade, and art. Great chiefs ruled networks of islands, forging alliances and rivalries. Canoes laden with goods crossed the channels between islands. Salt shells, feathers, cotton, and precious stones exchanged in rituals of diplomacy. The Caribbean Sea was not a barrier. It was their highway, a living breathing road connecting nations and hearts. In this age, the people of the Caribbean lived with a rhythm that mirrored the ocean itself. Life was a cycle, the tide of planting, fishing, celebration, and reverence. Their stories told of gods who rose from the sea foam, of ancestors who turned into stars. Every mountain, every river, every whisper of wind held meaning. But even in this paradise, change was coming. Rumors whispered across the waves of strangers from the east, of monstrous ships that floated like clouds. Yet for now, the Caribbean remained untouched, a realm of harmony and power, a world alive in the heart of the ocean. The forgotten kingdoms were not forgotten yet. They were alive, flourishing, and standing on the edge of destiny. As the centuries passed, the islands of the Caribbean transformed into a network of thriving chiefdoms, kingdoms of spirit, trade, and song. At the heart of this world stood the Taíno, the people of the Greater Antilles, Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica. Their world was one of balance between land and sea, body and spirit, the seen and unseen. And yet within that balance, power was taking shape. The Taíno were builders, organizers, and visionaries. Their villages, known as ucayeques, were laid out in circular clusters, around open plazas, spaces where the life of the community pulsed like a heartbeat. These plazas were more than gathering grounds. They were the stage for stories, dances, and sacred ball. Games played in honor of the gods. Around them rose the homes of the caciques, the chiefs whose authority was both political and spiritual. Each cacique ruled over several villages, connected by kinship and allegiance. Beneath them were niteinos, the nobles, warriors and advisors, and bohiques, the shamans who spoke to the gods through trance and smoke. The common people, laborious, worked the land, fished the rivers, and wove the fabrics of daily life. But no matter their rank, all were bound by the same rituals, the same beliefs, and the same reverence for their world. Agriculture was their lifeblood. Cassava, maize, sweet potatoes, beans, and peppers grew in carefully. Tended gardens known as conquests. The women planted the men, fished and hunted, and together they sustained a balance between work and worship. Every harvest was celebrated with festivals that lasted for days. Music, dance, feasting, and offerings to the Zimis, the divine spirits that governed all existence. To the Taíno, the world was alive with meaning. The sun Yukahu was the giver of life. Atabe, the mother of waters, was the creator of all things. Every storm, every gust of wind was the breath of a god. When hurricanes came, hurricanes, as they called them, they were seen not as destruction, but as the cleansing rage of the sky. Art was a language of power. The Taíno carved their stories into stone and bone shaping, idols that captured the faces of gods and ancestors. They painted their bodies for rituals, adorned themselves with feathers, shells, and gold. Guanin, they called it not merely for decoration, but as symbols of prestige and sacred energy. To wear gold was to carry sunlight upon your skin. Trade flowed like blood between the islands. Great canoes, some holding more than 100 men, cut across the waves between Cuba and Hispaniola, between Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. They carried not just goods, but songs, stories, marriages, and alliances. The Caribbean was not divided. It was united by the sea, a living network of islands bound by invisible ties of kinship and faith. But with power came ambition. Some caciques sought to expand their influence, forging empires that spanned multiple islands. Legendary leaders like Kadiki Guacanagarix Sanakaona and Kaonabo became figures of awe and authority, rulers whose words shaped the destiny of thousands. Under their leadership, the Taíno world reached its golden age, a time when their kingdoms flourished. Their temples rose high and their songs carried across the waters. Yet beneath the peace, there was a growing sense of unease, faint but persistent. Strange omens began to spread from the horizon. Fishermen spoke of massive floating islands of wood, appearing far off at sea, moving without oars or sails. The shamans saw visions of men in shining skins, carrying thunder and fire. The Zemis, they said, had grown restless. Still, life continued. The Taino danced beneath. The stars sang to their gods and trusted the rhythms that had guided them for generations. They could not yet imagine that the calm waves surrounding their islands were soon to carry a storm that would change their world forever. For beyond the horizon, the wind was shifting and the forgotten kingdoms of the Caribbean were about to meet their fate. Far to the southeast, where the winds were stronger and the islands smaller, another people ruled the waters, the Kalinago, known to the world as the Caribs. If the Taino were the builders and dreamers of the Caribbean, the Caribs were its warriors, fierce, fearless, and bound to the ocean like blood to the heart. Their realm stretched across the Lesser Antilles from Dominica to Grenada, and their canoes cut through the waves like blades of obsidian. The Caribs were born of salt and storm. Legend said they came from the South American mainland, warriors who sailed north on great expeditions, conquering island after island. Where they landed, they brought with them a way of life built on courage, discipline and strength. Their people lived in smaller settlements than the Taino, but their reputation was vast. Their name carried the scent of battle and the whisper of fear. They were masters of the sea. Their canoes were long and sleek, able to carry dozens of men. With them, they could strike, swiftly vanishing into the horizon before their enemies could gather their strength. Their warriors were trained from childhood. Young boys taught to wield bows, spears, and clubs, to swim against the currents, to read the moods of the sea as others might read the sky. To the Caribs, courage was sacred. Their belief was simple. Life was a battle, and honor came only through strength and survival. In their oral traditions, heroes and ancestors were remembered, not for peace but for valor. Their songs told of raids across the islands, of warriors who crossed the sea, guided by the stars, of chiefs who faced death with laughter on their lips. Their social order was strict but respected. Each village was led by a Tubatuli, the war chief, whose leadership came not from birthright but from bravery and skill. Councils of elders advised them, while shamans, the keepers of the spirit world, performed rituals that called upon the gods of sea and sky for victory. Women held powerful roles as well, tending crops, crafting pottery, and maintaining the spiritual balance of the home. Unlike the Taino, the Caribs spoke a different tongue, sharp and rhythmic, carrying the pulse of the ocean within its sound. European tales would later paint the Caribs as cannibals, fierce, bloodthirsty savages. But behind the myths lies a deeper truth. The Caribs were not monsters. They were defenders, guardians of their freedom, fighting to preserve their lands and their way of life. They were proud of their independence, suspicious of outsiders, and determined to live by the code of their ancestors. Their encounters with the Taino were complex, sometimes peaceful, often hostile. The two cultures traded, intermarried, and occasionally warred. The sea between them was both bridge and battlefield. And in the balance of their rivalry, the Caribbean remained alive, with movement, with story, with purpose. As the 15th century waned, the Caribs stood at their peak unchallenged. Masters of the southern islands, their villages clung to steep cliffs and hidden coves, safe from surprise. Smoke from their fires curled into the sky, mingling with the cries of seabirds and the crash of waves. They believed their world would last forever. The sea, the stars, the endless rhythm of life and death. But even for them, the horizon was no longer safe. Whispers reached their shores of strangers who had crossed the ocean wielding thunder and metal. The Caribs watched as foreign ships approached neighboring islands, bringing with them goods, diseases, and death. The world was changing, and even the fiercest warriors could not hold back the tide that was coming. The Caribs would soon become both legend and warning, remembered not just as warriors, but as the last defenders of a Caribbean that would never be the same again. Their songs would fade into the sound of cannons, their canoes, replaced by wooden giants from another world. Yet even in defeat, the spirit of the Caribs would endure, carried in the salt of the sea and the defiant cry of every island that still dares to call itself free. The year was 1492. The sea was calm, the horizon endless, and the people of the Caribbean looked toward the sunrise, unaware that their world was about to shatter. Across the Atlantic, 3 wooden ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, drifted westward, their sails full of wind and ambition. They carried not only men, but a storm of greed, faith, and empire. When Christopher Columbus first stepped onto the sands of the Bahamas, he believed he had reached the edge of Asia. The people who greeted him, the gentle Lucayans, offered food, gifts, and friendship. To Columbus, they were noble savages, innocent souls ripe for conversion and conquest. To the Lucayans, he was perhaps a god, or at least something that the Zemis had foretold. They could not know that this meeting, warm and peaceful as it seemed, would mark the beginning of their end. Word of the newcomers spread quickly through the islands. The Taino of Hispaniola and Puerto Rico heard stories of floating mountains of men clad in shining skins who carried sticks that roared like thunder. Some were curious, others fearful. Chiefs gathered their advisors, wondering if the gods themselves had returned. At first, there was exchange food, gold, gifts. The Spaniards admired the Tainos' hospitality, their skill in craft, their abundance of resources. But admiration soon turned to desire. The gold ornaments worn by the Taino were not symbols of the sun, they became the object of the Europeans' greed. In their hunger for wealth, the invaders began to demand tribute, forcing the people of the islands to gather gold that did not exist in the quantities they imagined. The harmony of centuries cracked like fragile pottery. Villages were raided, chiefs were imprisoned, and the people who had once ruled their islands freely were enslaved. The encomienda system, a polite word for bondage, reduced entire communities to laborers in their own lands. The fields that once fed families now served foreign masters. The Taino resisted. Great leaders rose to defend their world. Conaibu, the proud warrior who struck against Spanish forts, Anacaona, the poet queen of Zaragua, whose beauty and wisdom became legend, Guarionex, who tried to make peace only to see his people destroyed. Their bravery echoed across the mountains and valleys, their names carried by the wind like prayers. But bravery was not enough. The invaders brought with them invisible weapons, diseases that struck like spirits of death. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through the islands, killing by the thousands. Whole villages vanished. The Taino priests, unable to stop the dying, said the gods had turned their backs. Within a generation, the great chiefdoms that had ruled the Caribbean for centuries were gone. Meanwhile, the Caribs, fierce and defiant, watched the destruction from afar. When the Europeans tried to take their lands, they fought back with fury. Their canoes struck Spanish ships, their arrows rained from the cliffs. They refused to bow, and their resistance became legend. But even their courage could not hold forever. The Europeans brought more men, more weapons, and a determination to rule the islands at any cost. By the early 1500s, the Caribbean was no longer the realm of the old kingdoms. The plazas were silent, the ball courts empty, the Zemis buried beneath the soil. The songs that once echoed over the sea had been replaced by the clatter of chains and the prayers of conquest. Yet even in this darkness, fragments of the old world survived. Some Taino fled into the mountains, living in secret for generations. Some Kalinago communities hid deep in the forests of Dominica and St. Vincent, where they held onto their traditions in whispers and rituals. The bloodlines of the Caribbean's first peoples did not vanish. They transformed, blending with African and European roots to create new cultures, new identities. The old kingdoms had fallen, but their spirit lingered like the echo of a drumbeat across the water. The Caribbean had entered a new age, one of pain, of survival, and of rebirth. But the memory of what was lost would never fade, carried forever in the salt of the sea and the hearts of those who still called these islands home. Centuries have passed since the last Taino chief stood against the thunder of conquest, since the last Kalinago war canoe slipped beneath the waves. The great plazas of the Caribbean are silent now, buried beneath sugar fields and modern cities. But if you listen, truly listen, you can still hear them. The faint echo of drums beneath the hum of the wind. The whisper of ancient prayers in the crash of the waves. The forgotten kingdoms were never truly gone. They live on, hidden in plain sight. Across the Caribbean, traces of these ancient worlds linger in every corner of life. In the names of places, Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, echoes of old tongues survive. In the foods, cassava, maize, pepper, live the agricultural genius of those who first cultivated the land. The way people fish, the stories told under starlight, the rhythm of the drums that mark celebration and mourning, all are remnants of civilizations that refuse to vanish. In the mountains of Puerto Rico, some families still speak of Taino ancestry, their faces bearing the same strong cheekbones, the same quiet resilience. In Dominica, the Kalinago, people still walk the forests of their ancestors, proud and unbroken, preserving their crafts, their dances, their language, living proof that the Caribbean's first people endure. Their hands still weave the same baskets, carve the same symbols, and tell the same stories that once echoed through 1,000 islands. And beyond the islands, scholars and archaeologists continue to search, unearthing pottery shards carved, idols and forgotten ball courts that tell of a world far more complex than history ever admitted. Each discovery, each fragment of bone or tool is a whisper from the past, a reminder that these people were not footnotes but founders of Caribbean civilization. Their spirit is woven into the identity of every islander today. The Taínos' love for the land, the Caribs' defiance, the Lucayans' grace, they all live within the soul of the Caribbean. Every song sung in celebration, every festival that honors the sea and the harvest carries the rhythm of ancient ancestors. The kingdoms may have fallen, their temples may have crumbled, but their essence remains in the ocean that still remembers their canoes, in the wind that still hums their prayers, and in the hearts of those who carry their legacy forward. Because history does not die, it sleeps waiting for those brave enough to awaken it. And the forgotten kingdoms of the Caribbean are no longer forgotten. The sun sets over the Caribbean Sea, its golden light, melting into waves that have seen the rise and fall of empires. The wind drifts softly through the palms, carrying voices, whispers of the Taino, the Kalinago, the Lucayans. Their stories, once silenced by time and conquest, now rise again, like the tide returning to the shore. These were the first dreamers of the islands, the navigators who mapped the stars, the farmers who turned the wild earth into paradise, the warriors who fought for freedom beneath an endless sky. Their kingdoms may have vanished from maps, their temples buried beneath centuries of soil, but their memory endures not as ruins, but as roots. Roots that still feed the soul of the Caribbean today. When you walk the beaches of these islands, feel the sand beneath your feet, that is their home. When you hear the drumbeat in a festival, know that it's the heartbeat of those who came before. The forgotten kingdoms are not truly gone. They live in the people, in the music, in the sea itself. History remembers conquerors, but the islands remember their children. And as long as the waves keep singing against the shore, the story of the forgotten kingdoms of the Caribbean will never fade.